Minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, has defended Cyril Ramaphosa's size of the 7th administration's cabinet. Addressing the media yesterday, Ntshavheni said the bloated executive was due to election results with the need to be inclusive in the formation of government of national unity. Ntshavheni also announced that it cost almost R1 billion in benefits and perks in 2023. In the new administration, this will likely go above the R1 billion mark. Let's talk about all of this and the impact to us, the taxpayer, with the director of Firstsource Money, Redge Nkosi. Reg, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time and being available to us. We appreciate it. So we hear a couple of numbers, or numbers being bandied about in terms of the cost for this administration compared to previous administrations, and I thought it might be nice to just break down for our viewers some of where that money and that calculation is coming from. Ministers get a salary of 2.68 million rand and then 2.2 million rand each for each deputy minister. And then, of course, you've got the costs in certain instances, 500 million rand allocation for VIP protection and security, and then 390 million rand for support staff. Bring your financial brain to us and share with us whether this is an efficient expenditure of money for the size of the cabinet that we have now. I mean, the politics aside, where it was a politics of expediency and appeasement. You've got to include all of the different people, which is why we end up with the number we have now.
Thanks again, Rapeti. Well, frankly, the number is quite large. In fact, those numbers that are being cited there, they're mere estimates. They're likely to balloon far much more than that, because lots of incidental costs that come alongside the ones that are sort of fixed, as to where the salary of 2.7, for example, for the minister, it will largely be slightly more than that. It fluctuates. But again, when it comes to auxiliary staff running around, Cape Town and Pretoria, the numbers will balloon far much more than that. That we know, and the experience is such that almost very uncontrollable as you go on running the government machinery. It's very, very complex. So the justification from Minister Ntshavheni is understandable given the politics, but quite frankly, the taxpayer will have to incur quite a bit to meet the highly bloated bureaucracy now that we have in this GNU.
All right, so what number then, if, as you say, okay, there might be fluctuations and of course annual increases, I suppose, at some point as well we'd need to factor in. But for where we stand now, what number realistically should we be talking about, Reg?
I think the most minimum we should look at should be about 1.5 billion. Right, that the number that we see as most likely to be the correct number, not just 1 billion. And that 1 billion, again, like you said, we don't talk about the increases in salaries that come along. We're just talking about the running of the machinery between the executive itself. So the movements between Pretoria and Cape Town is quite hectic and sometimes quite ad hoc, to the extent that you have people running all over in instances where they shouldn't. So we look at a number of just slightly more than 1.5 billion rand, excluding the others that are there, the 500 million that's stated. But I'm talking about the big number that has been cited there. So it's about 1.5 billion.
As you say, and some of this, for some taxpayers who look at the cohort of deputy ministers, multiple deputy ministers for some departments, it's an eye-watering sum. Part of the conversation we're having in South Africa is, how do we get bang for our buck? We're certainly expecting then way more performance in these various portfolios, because now you've simply got far more warm bodies. If there's time, we can go back to that one and just the kind of tone that it sets for the country. But when we think about opportunities to cut costs, where would you say, given the situation is in a sense set in stone, we are where we are now, where are the opportunities to cut costs? It was interesting listening to Dean McPherson, who's the new Public Works and Infrastructure Minister, saying we're going to look at the register and see where we can use, instead of going the leasing route for buildings, look at what we already have in our infrastructure inventory, allocate those buildings for ministers and so on. Their homes, anything that is above what is already laid on is going to be for their own personal accounts. He was talking about things like curtains and the like that we've seen in the past really begin to inflate the cost of keeping ministers ensconced in their lifestyles is probably something that's going to come to an end. So there's an opportunity for cost cutting there. Where else do you see that opportunity?
Well, the travel has been quite often put as one of the key ones. So if the government can reduce the number of movements between Pretoria and between capitals as well globally, they should understand who should really go there. Some of the meetings that we get invited to, quite frankly, they're not as useful as we should think. So the government can, limit on logistics. In regard to pets like cars and so on, that's quite standard. I don't think we can be pretty picky about that. Transport is the key item when it comes to the running of the bureaucracy. And this transport, not just the local transport, but international transport, there, to me, we can begin to reduce. I don't think it's necessary for us to have to think in terms of reducing the representation of government abroad. That would be a disaster. I think South Africa requires to be present right across. So yeah, there's small expenses that accumulate over a period of time. Communication itself within government can be very, very inefficient. I think they can do better by ensuring that they're tied to better communication systems than the ones that have so far been the case. Ministers have to understand that this is just government, it's private. It's private people paying for them, and therefore they themselves have to ensure that they're quite tidy when it comes to the expenditures that they incur.
Reg, if you're asking for self-governance in this, as we've seen before, where people have gone on overseas trips for their own benefit, that this is not always necessarily a route that people will ethically follow. We don't always get ethical leadership and ethical governance. And that, again, we can see through a range of different examples in the South African experience, notwithstanding state capture itself, that there has to be another mechanism that almost restricts or limits, where you have to, in a sense, make a petition for certain expenditures. What already exists in the framework of accountability and financial accountability, especially in the context of austerity, that ministers are already beholden to, or that needs beefing up in terms of managing and containing expenses?
Well, there's lots of wasteful expenditure within government. To me, that has to be managed quite carefully. It's the source of much of the challenges that we face when it comes to the ballooning number that we look at, 1 billion, 1.5 billion, is wasteful expenditure, unnecessary expenditure in various pockets within the budget lines that, frankly, any bureaucracy can look at quite clearly and say, well, look, we're going to hold on this for a while and not do it. They have unnecessary party, if you want, unnecessary meetings that take place that shouldn't actually be taking place. And, throwing, unnecessary people into those meetings that should actually be reduced, in my view. So there are lots of wasteful expenditure that can be trimmed from there. But again, with a growing government as it is, you expect, again, a lot of waste coming through. I do not think that we are going to contain our costs. We should begin to, in my view, just put a code which says, the limits must be, like this in this particular issue, like this in this particular expenditure, and so on and so forth. Without that, I'm afraid we're going to be exceeding what is supposed to be expected.
All right, we're losing the signal, but it coincides with the end of the interview anyway. Redge Nkosi, thank you very much for talking to us, and he is Executive Director of Firstsource Money. We're looking at the projections or the cost, the real cost of this new cabinet and the executive that's just been announced and sworn in earlier this week, and whether there is the opportunity to begin to trim those costs so that the burden on the taxpayer isn't as high. When we come